Biggest problems we face in modern Christianity is there is too much reading scripture and then changing its meaning, because when we go to apply it in our natural life, we don't experience what we read in scripture. Perfect example of this is in, I believe it's 1 Peter, it might be 2 Peter, but Peter says that for those who have suffered in the body are finished with sin, so that they live the rest of their earthly lives no longer controlled by human desires, but by God's will. Yet when we go and we attempt to apply this idea to our life, and we begin to resist sin, and we feel that suffering process, and then we find ourselves failing and having to go back and ask for forgiveness over and over and over again. And so when we go and we apply these truths that we see in Scripture, that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, all things, but then we don't experience being able to do all things. Instead of holding on to the truth that God has given us, we change our interpretation of Scripture, and we come up with concepts like sanctification, but sanctification not as a short-term process to bring a person to be a vessel of use, but rather sanctification as a lifelong process of being perfected until you go to heaven. This is not what Scripture teaches us. If you look at the story of Abraham, it says that Abraham, when he looked at the age of his wife and himself, he acknowledged the fact that the natural reality was that they were well beyond childbearing years. And yet, he did not falter in that moment, but rather, he held on to God's promise that he would give birth to an heir through his wife Sarah. And it says that by holding on to that promise, through trust, by trust, he was given power to give birth to an heir. What does that mean? That means that Abraham held on to God's truth, even when the truth that he saw with his eyes said something completely different. But he held on to God's truth as being more real than the reality that he saw with his own eyes, until the time came that God's truth forced this reality to conform to his truth, instead of us conforming God's reality to our truth. Any wonder that we have so little power in the church and communities of faith? We have so many people out here going out into the world, applying Scripture, experiencing things not working the way that they read them, and then changing the way that it is written, instead of holding on to the truth that God has given us and waiting patiently, holding on to his truth, until by trust we are given power to begin conforming this reality to God's reality. We have to remember that the natural came out of the spiritual. God's truth always supersedes the truth of this reality, always, because this reality came from his reality. The truths that we see with our eyes here find their origin in his truths. When God's truth and the truth that I'm experiencing don't align, I can have absolute confidence that it is not his truth that needs to be adjusted. It's mine. This is why so many believers are living powerless lives. And it's incredibly important that we not live powerless lives, because this is not a kingdom of words, it is a kingdom of power. We forget so frequently, I think, when we start living this Christian life, we reduce it to moralism. We reduce it to living a good life, not realizing that it was never meant to be a kingdom of words. It was never meant to be a kingdom of morals. It was meant to be a kingdom of power. It is a kingdom where God is asserting his power in the earth to demonstrate that he is all-powerful, worthy of glory. His ways truly are higher than our ways. We don't come to that understanding through moralism. We come to that through experiencing his divine power acting in the earth and showing that what we see with our eyes are far less than what is actually available and what is actually true. This is why we live our life by faith and not by sight. Shh.